back to the Witch of Lupin Hollow YouTube channel. Today we're going to talk about how to know what kind of witch you are. So I did a video earlier called How to Know If You're a Witch, which I recommend you watch first so you can sort of understand what this path of a witch really is. And then come back here and watch this video because it's all about sort of like the next steps. Like once you know you're a witch, once you know this is the path that's right for you, this video and everything we're going to talk about in it is really about getting deeper with it and getting really intimate with what does being a witch mean to you and, what kind of witch are you? There's lots of different types of witches. In fact, I would say there's as many types of witches as there are witches in the world because we all really have our own individual path in many, many ways. There's no real rules in witchcraft. There's no defined law as to what it means to be any particular kind of witch. And so although there are a few different groups of popular paths, popular types of witches, we all practice a little bit differently and in our own way. So for example, I consider myself a cottage witch, which often gets lumped in with kitchen witches and hearth witches. And these three paths are all related, all connected, but they are distinct. We have, distinct ways that we each practice. And then within those groups, we all kind of do things our own way. And that's the beauty of witchcraft is there are no rules. Now, there are certain more established traditions within witchcraft as well, Wicca being the largest umbrella. Within Wicca, there's traditional Wicca, there's Dianic Wicca, there's Gardnerian Wicca, and then there's other paths too. There's heathenism, people who follow the Norse traditions. There's people following pretty much every possible path you can imagine within the very general and very broad umbrella of witchcraft. So how to know what's right for you? Well, it depends on a lot of factors, but I find the most important factors are your personal astrology, your ancestral cultures, and intuition that speaks to you about what's right for you, which that is at the root of it, the most important thing, but we'll come to it last because it's a big topic. So your personal astrology, finding your inner witch in your chart is really a lot of fun, and it can really give you a lot of insight into what to focus on, sort of like where to begin on your path as a witch. So number one, you want to look at your sun, moon, and rising signs. Those are the signs that your sun and moon were in at the moment you were born. And it's the sign that was rising on the eastern horizon at the moment you were born. So these have the most influence of all the planets and celestial bodies on who you are as a person. So I like to take the sun and moon and rising signs into consideration when thinking about what type of witchcraft might be right for you, because they give you a really good idea of your personality and about what you care about. You also can get a little bit deeper with this on your specifically witchy path by looking at where Pluto shows up for you, which is a generational planet. So lots of other people who were born around the same time as you have Pluto in the same sign, but it gives you a general idea of like what kind of spiritual transformation your generation is seeking. You can also look at what sign and house the asteroid Lilith shows up in for you, which gives you some insight into where your sort of rebellious witchy woman is. And then I also like to look at if you have any planets in the sign of Scorpio and what house you have Scorpio in, because Scorpio is the sign of the witch, as well as what sign and planets, if any, you have in the 8th house, because the 8th house is the house of the witch. So we can look at your chart to find all of these different elements to understand what kind of witch you might be. So for example, if you have a lot of fiery placements, so maybe you have, Scorpio in the 5th house, and you have Lilith in Sagittarius, or maybe you have the sun and the moon in Aries, these are going to be periods of really explosive growth, right? Like this is going to be where witchcraft is going to really support you in creating powerful manifestations, right? Like your witchcraft is going to be very external if you have a lot of fire in these different areas of your chart that indicate what kind of witch you might be. If you have a lot of earth placements, so, if you have Taurus, Virgo, or Capricorn in any of your witchy areas of your chart or in your sun, moon, or rising, that's going to be a very grounded energy. A lot of cottage, kitchen, and hearth witches or even garden witches, of course, are very connected to the earth. So, those kinds of paths might be right for you. If you have airy signs, a lot of air placements, if you have Scorpio in a air house, which are the 3rd, 7th, and 11th houses, or if you have Pluto and Lilith or your sun, moon, and rising in Gemini, Libra, or Aquarius, then those are going to be very intellectual witches, right? Witches with a lot of air placements really enjoy meditation and journaling and like asking the big questions. You like communicating about your practice. You like, talking about it, journaling about it, writing about it, thinking about it. And then finally, if you have a lot of water placements, so Scorpio and the 8th house are water signs to begin with, but if you have another water sign like Pisces, Cancer, or if you have Scorpio itself in the 8th house, if you have Lilith, Pluto, or your sun, moon, and rising signs in Cancer, Scorpio, or Pisces, then you're going to be a very intuitive witch. You might really love shadow work. You might love really getting in touch with your intuition, doing dream work, and really spending time processing your emotions and really doing this intuitive work with divination. You might be that type of witch that's really focused on your intuition. So depending on where all of these different elements show up in your chart is going to give you some insight into what kind of witch you might be. Now, your ancestral culture can also have a lot of impact on you. There's a big problem within the spiritual community of cultural appropriation, and it's something that's really important for us to talk about because so many aspects that have become homogenized as part of this general spiritual culture are from actual cultures and very marginalized cultures at that. So you want to think about what did your own ancestors do? What did your own ancestors believe? Where did that information that you are interested in come from? Did it come from your own culture? Did it come from another culture? And if it came from another culture, how can you study that respectfully? So it's important to think about in general, but I also find that when we research our own ancestral cultures and our own heritage and genealogy, sometimes we find new things we didn't even know about that are really fascinating for us. So that can be a really wonderful thing to explore, not just your own family tree, because it's not about finding witches in your family tree, as I talked about in the How to Know If You're a Witch video. It's not important that you are descended from a line of witches. That's true for very few people, but it can be really powerful to find out, what did witches within your ancestral culture believe? How did they practice? How were they treated at various points in history? This varies very much depending on culture, although in general, most cultures have persecuted witches at some point, but most cultures have some kind of magical people who are more connected to their intuition, who are more connected to the spirit realm, who are more connected to animals. Doing that research and really finding out what your ancestors were doing and believing, because it's a maximum of 80 generations ago that all of our ancestors were pagan. That's the beginning of Christianity. Anything that predates that, which is, not so very long ago in the grand scheme of the world and human history, everyone before that was practicing some kind of paganism or some kind of magic. And so it can be really powerful to find out what they were doing and see if it resonates with you, because often that can lead us down a path that helps us to understand who we are as a witch more intimately. And then finally, you want to really always check in with your intuition. If you are finding something in your astrological chart, if you're finding something in your heritage, something that speaks to you, check in with your intuition and say, why do I find this interesting? Is this right for me? Is this something I should pursue and explore further? So, you want to just, get quiet with yourself and be willing to listen to whatever answer comes up, whatever answer bubbles up from within you. And sometimes your intuition will say, no, that's not the right path. Trust it when that happens. Sometimes when we get a no, we do it anyway. And I find I almost always, if not always, regret it when I don't listen to my intuition. So, you want to check in with your intuition about anything that comes up, whether it's in your own research or just maybe something that keeps coming up around you. Maybe you keep seeing crystal balls and being intrigued by them, or maybe you keep hearing about a particular type of divination or a particular type of ceremony and you're really interested in it. Ask your intuition, is this something I should be exploring? and then pursue it or not from there. There's lots and lots and lots of different types of witches. I find that some of the most common types are either home-centered witches like cottage, kitchen, hearth, or nature-centered witches like garden, green, wild witches, hedge witches. These are all people who are either really centered on like sanctuary, sacred space, the home space, or, really centered on the garden or the wilderness or, connecting with nature in some way. And then there's the intuitive witches. There's witches who are really interested in shadow work. There's witches who are very empathic and really pick up on people's emotions. I can read that. There's people who are very connected to the lunar cycle and really connected to those phases of the moon or to the sun, right? People who are really connected to the seasons. So regardless of what kind of witch you are, you always want to follow the path that really feels right for you and really calls to you. If you want some more insight and more support on what kind of witch you might be, there's a link below this video to take you to a quiz on my website. It's just a fun little quiz. It's definitely not the be-all, end-all of what kind of witch you definitely are, but I find it's pretty accurate, and it should give you some insight into what kind of path you might want to explore first. There's some really great suggestions of, what kind of witch you are based on what's important to you, what you care about, what speaks to you, and also, what kinds of challenges you face as a witch, what things you might struggle with, and some insight on how you can deal with those struggles. Click the link, comment on this video, tell me, what kind of witch you got on the quiz or what kind of witch you identify as if you already know. And I look forward to seeing all of your results. Make sure you follow the channel so that you can be notified whenever I put out a new video, and I will see you next time.